And you didn't disappoint, I will tell you, at least from my perspective, in terms of inundating us with content and then giving a lot of the specifics the investment community has been clamoring for. But let me just start with the big picture, if I can, Bob, which is you clearly are pointing in a different direction for this company in terms of the way it goes about distributing the amazing content that you create here at Disney. Why is that something that you feel is necessary to do, and necessary to do in such a significant way as you detailed today?
Well, I think you have to look at not only the way the world is going, but we had to assess what the biggest opportunity was for the company to grow over the long term. And clearly, consumers are enjoying a kind of a different form of entertainment in the home, one that is over the top, not necessarily connected to a traditional satellite or cable distributor or distribution model. One that has a significant amount of choice, one that enables the consumer to customize or to have personalized experiences, one that can be watched seamlessly on multiple devices. And so it was clear that given the company's ability to create content that people love, why not give people content that they love, but on platforms that are becoming more and more interesting to them, more and more compelling to them.
Now, you set out some relatively ambitious goals in terms of subscriber projections, between 60 and 90 million on the Disney Plus service by fiscal year 2024, or the end of that. And as well Hulu, which you control 60% of, I think 40 to 60 million subs in the same time period. Some people look at Netflix and say 150 million subs around the world, and they still lose $2 to $3 billion a year. How is Disney going to be able to make money, and more money than otherwise would have, by licensing so much of that content in this new world, if Netflix is still losing so much with such a large subscriber base?
Well, as we demonstrated at the beginning of this presentation, we have almost 100 years of creating great content that the world loves. Under Disney, and then Marvel and Pixar, and of course Star Wars, and then adding National Geographic to it. And I think when you start with a brand base that is that strong, then you have an advantage basically in the marketplace because of the love that people have for that brand and the desire to be entertained by it, to spend money on those brands. We've seen that in multiple ways as a company. And while I grant you that in this new world, or in this new medium, monetization is still maybe nascent. Do you want to? Sorry.
Go ahead.
I grant you that in this new world, while we're still really learning more and more about monetization, we enter this business, I think, with real strength in terms of the brand affinity that our products have, and I think that gives us not only the ability to reach more people, but it gives us the ability to do so in more economically viable ways.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. Economically viable meaning what? You're pricing the service at $6.99. That is below certainly what Netflix is at and a number of the other competitors out there. What about it makes it economically viable at those subscriber projections when you do say you're going to be profitable by fiscal year 20?
Yeah, I don't think, interestingly enough, we're pricing this to be accessible to the millions and millions, and not hundreds of millions, of Disney fans and Marvel fans and Pixar fans and Star Wars fans that are out there. And I think that's where you have to start. The sheer number of people worldwide that know our brands, that interact with our brands on a daily basis, that spend money on our brands is huge. And no other company has that. So, well, I think Netflix has done a good job of creating brand value and name value, and a product that I think is considered of great value to a lot of people. They're still building their brand in many respects, whereas in our case, we start with a customer relationship that in many respects is visceral. As I mentioned, I was taken to see Cinderella by my grandparents when I was, I think, 4 years old, and I watched that movie with my grandchildren. It's 5 generations of Igers that watched that movie. There's a connection that my family has to these stories and to these brands, and so if I see the opportunity to buy Disney Plus, and I can watch it on all these devices, and I can download the movies, and I'm going to watch original product, but I'm also going to watch things from the library, that's something I know that I'm going to want.
Nobody disputes the power of the brand. I think it's apparent to everybody, and the evergreen nature of it that you just mentioned in terms of spanning generations. But there are those who say, you know what, you have a great model now, even with the bundle starting to certainly lose carriage. Nonetheless, the license fees that you're going to forego as a result of now putting so much of your own content on the platform are significant. Some say as much as $2.5 billion in incremental profits in 19, perhaps as much as $5 billion a year by the early 2020s that you're foregoing in license fees. Why is that is it the better way to go?
Because I think there are platform economics that trump license fees to third parties. We can start with the affinity that people have to the brand. They want to be connected to it. But obviously, the ability to have a direct relationship with the consumer gives us, I think, an opportunity to, in having that relationship with them, to monetize much more effectively. Knowing your consumer gives you the ability to, for instance, give them a more compelling experience. And have a connection. Now, also, I think is obvious is, if you look at the Disney consumer, they're going to movies in movie theaters, they're renting or downloading movies in their home, they're buying consumer products, they're visiting our parks, they're sailing on our cruise ships, and I could go on. And interestingly enough, now that's true with Marvel and Pixar and Star Wars across multiple businesses. If suddenly your customer relationship is much tighter, if the proximity between you and your customer is better, then you're going to serve them a lot better across your platforms, and you'll monetize, that I call it broadened, deepened relationship.
But it's fully.
Whereas in the if you look at this company over the years, where we've been distributing movies through movie theaters, and the movie theater is the relationship with the customer, even though it's our product that is touching the hearts and basically becoming part of the deep and happy memory. The cable channels or the satellite the channels are distributed through satellite providers and cable providers. The customer relationship is theirs. The consumer products are usually sold by big box retailers. The customer is theirs, or by Amazon. I could go on and on. We have a customer relationship with all these folks through third parties. And other than our theme parks, where we have a direct relationship, we don't know who these customers are. And in knowing who they are, I think we have an opportunity that is extraordinary from a bottom line perspective.
So it's worth the many billions in costs that you're going to see between now and 2024.
Yes, and also, look, I think you have to consider that a lot of the product that's on that service is being made for another platform and being monetized for that platform. So you look at all the movies, put aside the library, but you look at, just say, Captain Marvel, which is the first movie that will be available,
right.
The first original movie that'll be available. That will have over $1 billion in global box office, probably well over by the time it becomes available. So the cost of that product has already basically been borne by its initial basically foray into the marketplace. Now, I realize that we could license it to third parties and make money on it, but it's much more efficient for us to do it this way and have it be part of a service that's also creating new content, which, by the way, the content that we're creating that's original for this also will create longer-term value for
right, but in a sense, it does fully commit you in terms of what you're producing to the service. I mean,
fully.
That's where you are. So this has got to work. In other words, if 5 years you find yourself not getting the projections that perhaps you had, the model's not going to necessarily be in the right place.
Well, I'm an optimist. I'm a realist, but I'm an optimist, and I've been at the company for 45 years. I've been president or COO since 2000, and I have a strong understanding of, or a deep understanding and appreciation of Disney and its brand and its relationship to consumers. And so I'm pretty optimistic about the ability for this thing to work, particularly when we make it accessible because of the content we're putting on, because of the user interface, and because of the price. So I believe this is going to be successful. If in 5 years' time it proves, I prove to be wrong or we prove to be wrong, we're still making great content that's going to be in great demand globally, and you can shift in a moment and license to third parties. You can shift that
pretty quickly if you needed to. Not that you're necessarily going to, because of course you expect it to be successful.
I do. I don't want to dwell on that for that reason, but I don't think that's really an issue. Look, if you're building up library value regardless.
Right. Right. You mentioned, of course, theatrical display. There's been some questions about windowing, whether or not the service over time is going to start to see some of your original content when it comes to even the big movies sooner than it otherwise would. Is that a possibility?
This is really not about windowing to us because, frankly, those other windows are really working for us. It was mentioned earlier that our studios had 2 years where they've had over $7 billion in global box office. By the way, that's only on about, 10 movies a year. So that's really working for us. And if it's not broken, we don't want to try to fix it. I don't really think for us there would be any more money in it if we were to put those movies on the service a little earlier. Don't forget, in that window after it's available for its theatrical run, these movies will be available for a form of rental or download or purchase. Physical copies are still being
You were
sold.
asked towards the end of the presentation today, you're going to have 3 services in the marketplace, obviously. Disney Plus, which we've been talking about here, Hulu, and ESPN Plus, which already is in the market now. Do you run the risk, particularly when it comes to Hulu and Disney Plus, both operating at scale, of confusion amongst the consumer or with the different interfaces? I just wonder whether there's a way to sort of consolidate that offering that perhaps is more efficient for you.
I think there'll be a way to consolidate the creation, meaning the technology and both the user interface, customer relationship management, data storage, all those things across those businesses. But we still have a minority shareholder in Hulu, and so until we work our way through that relationship, I think you can basically figure that Hulu is going to be run pretty much as it's been run. On the ESPN front, the back office and the back of house, so to speak, is the same, but the user interface is different because you're talking about 2 very different products. Also, I study the marketplace very carefully, and we both know that, because you're in the same business in many ways, we're being distributed to the home on platforms that were created many, many years ago, that served us well and the consumer extremely well over now decades. But I think in today's world, I don't think the consumer really wants to buy 150, 200 channels of programming for a fairly significant price when they're not interested in many of those channels. And in some cases, they can't even find them. And I think what we're starting to see in terms of that platform is not necessarily the popularity of these channels in decreasing, is I think consumers are starting to say, wait a minute, the price-to-value relationship, even though I'm getting a lot of content and a lot of quality, isn't really there because I don't need all of that
I know,
stuff.
but a lot of this started, and you and I have had this discussion, and in fact, some of your peers, if you want to call them that in the business, look at you and say, that started because of ESPN, because of how much you're charging for it, because you paid all that money for all those rights a long time ago.
I think we were a convenient scapegoat in that regard. I think all of the channels, I know that ESPN charged more per subscriber than a lot of the other channels, but I think you have to look at the value that was created there, both to the consumer and to the distributor. The advertising rates on live sports, the distributor, the cable company, the satellite, have traditionally been better, for instance, and those channels are in demand. And look, it's an open marketplace, and the more in demand you have, the more pricing leverage you have. I don't think that ESPN should be blamed for what we're seeing today. I think you just have you have a different consumer today, and the more choice that has entered the market.
Well, your grandkids or kids or my kids, they're not going to subscribe to this bundle. That's just not happening.
But
right?
I think
you believe that, don't you?
I believe that they will continue to watch a linear television. I think live sports and certainly news and maybe financial news, by the way,
we can always hope,
continue to have value, and people will be interested in it. But I think long term, I think you have to consider that linear television is going to be less popular than just television, than programs. And we're in the short. In the short term, we still are very supportive of the channels that we own and that we're distributing. We're going to continue to put resources behind them to create great programming. I think long term, you have to put the consumer first. So if going all the way back to how this started, if we put Hulu and ESPN and Disney Plus into one product, the only way you can get these things is one, that's doing exactly what the consumer today doesn't want. Now, if there are consumers that want it that way, we'll give it to them that way. And hopefully, ultimately, in all 3, one username, one password, make it really easy for them to do it, and a discount.
A discount, right?
Yes, but we still have ownership issues as it relates to Hulu to accomplish that.
Well, Bob, you've got a lot to get to today. Of course, we do appreciate your taking some time with us after this very important day. Thank you.
Thank you.